Hey guys, welcome to this week's home experience, and Chris, welcome to my home.
Thank you.
We're here in my kitchen, family room area. This is Chris Johnson. Excited for you to meet him. Some of you probably met him already, him and his family. Tell us a little bit about your family.
Wife Jamie, we've been married 11 years.
All right.
And I've got 3 kids, 8, 6, and 3.
Love your kids, two adorable girls, and then little Charles, man.
Yeah.
He's awesome. If you see them at one of our events, come and say hi to them and get to know them. We like to do this where we sit down and just have a conversation. I think it's important that as a church, we hear from each other and we learn from each other, right? It's the model of the way church has been done for 500 plus years is there's one pastor preaching to everybody else, and everybody else sits back and receives. And I believe that there's a lot of good things that can be shared through our testimonies, our stories, things that we've learned. And so Chris and I were talking. I'm like, Chris, would you share with us a little bit about your personal story, your testimony about what God has done in your life? And so that's what we're going to do today. I pray that you will take something out of this today and then apply it to your life, and learn a little bit from his story. So make this really quick. This is what's cool about when you don't put giant billboards out there and try to recruit people to get them to cross your fingers like, hope they come. And you just say, God, bring whoever you want. I'm available. You get guys like Chris and his family. Literally, we did not know each other. And you grew up pretty much your whole life in a traditional brick and mortar church. It's all you knew every Sunday, all day, every day. In fact, you and your family got really involved at a large church, call it a mega church.
Yeah.
And doing all the things, growing, learning, meeting people, spending hours serving and leading and all that kind of stuff. And you're still pretty young, and yet something was off, and you and your wife started feeling a certain way. I'd love for you to share that so that you can people can understand your heart and what you felt like God was showing you at the time.
Yeah. I mean, I think it really came down to a lot of asking the question, why?
Why what?
Why do we do things this way?
Oh.
I think that was really a major catalyst of change for us. A lot of Sunday drives home from church. We didn't live very far away, but we would talk about the message, the lesson in class, whatever it was, how we felt like things were going. And what we noticed was that over time, lots of questions started coming up around is this really the way things should go? As a Christian, are we doing this because it's all we've known, or are we doing this because it's producing an outcome that really glorifies God? And like you mentioned, lots and lots of good things came from that. I want to make that very clear.
For sure.
We served a lot. We met lots of great people, but I think that was one of the things to keep the answer brief. I would say
you started looking at
what we're doing.
You're walking in. You're like, well, why is that happening? Why do we do things this way? And why is there always this? And you just started asking the question why, which, by the way, I think is a healthy thing for us to do, right? Self-reflection is so important. And oftentimes we find ourselves just going with the flow.
Right.
We go, and it's very hard sometimes to swim against the current.
Yeah.
But you and your wife started feeling like, man, I don't know, God is stirring something in us. And this was happening before COVID?
This was all before COVID, yeah.
And what happened?
Yeah, so I think we started that feeling that we were just talking about. That sent us down a rabbit hole, hardcore. We were just diving full on into scripture. There's a lot of amazing...
For yourself? Why were you doing that?
Yeah.
So you started reading well, what did Jesus say about this? And how did he do things? And talking with your wife and stuff?
Yeah, and it was even more things that, without getting myself into trouble here, it was even asking things about why did we do certain things that weren't even really clear in Scripture. And I think that the church has made a lot of traditions that maybe are well-intentioned, but
What are
you
they
start
really accomplishing?
Scratching the surface a little bit. Yeah, what are they accomplishing? Are there other priorities that we could do differently? So we went down a rabbit hole of scripture, lots of great books and content and YouTube videos and all kinds of things that people that were feeling like
What you
us,
felt. Yeah.
but maybe they put it into more tangible like ways, the content, and I would say that really like opened our eyes a lot. And then, to answer your question, I would say it was a pretty steady, slippery slope from there. I would say things progressed very rapidly once we kind of felt like those blinders were off and we were asking more questions and lots more conversations on Sunday driving home.
People get real quick. People
Yeah.
get sometimes they feel guilty for questioning status quo, for questioning like, oh, you're questioning the church. Did you feel any of that? Like just some guilt or some shame or just a little bit of like, I don't know.
I would say
don't wanna...
weird. I by nature, I naturally am that guy. Like
Okay.
I'm always going to question things. And my wife has a lot of those traits as well. So I think I'm comfortable questioning the status quo. However, you do feel weird.
Yeah.
You feel like something's wrong. Like,
Yeah.
well, all these thousands and thousands of people or, 20, 30 of our friends that are at the church, they're not having the issues that we're having. Why
am
what's
I
wrong
feeling
with
this
me?
way?
What's wrong with you that
Yeah.
you're causing a ruckus or you're questioning things? So yeah, there's definitely a lot of that.
So then COVID hits. You were planning on leaving the traditional church with nothing, no parachute,
Right.
Didn't know what was going to happen. COVID hits and does it for you.
Yep.
And you're like, oh, well, okay. I mean,
Awkward, yeah. Now what?
but at the same time, so you guys started meeting with some couples because there was, what else were you going to do, right?
Yep.
And sort of having fellowship and time together.
Yes.
Similar to home experience a little
Very
bit,
much
but
was,
not knowing, not having really.
No idea.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so you go down that path, and then the churches open back up,
Yep.
and it's pretty much gone. Everybody goes back. And goes back to status quo, kind of, or.
Yeah, I think our group that was meeting at the time, it just happened to kind of schedules, and there was a lot of different logistical conflicts.
Reasons,
So there's a little bit more to it than that. But yeah, you're right. We kind of felt when that group sort of disbanded, what are we going to do? And then when you don't have community, that's not a great place to be either.
No.
So we were doing a lot of probably what everyone did out there. We're streaming services online Sunday morning, trying to figure out, let's try this church and then this church. And we were turning on different services in the same Sunday morning at times just to find something that fit, and we did it.
Yeah.
Right, because we felt so confident of leaving that model that ultimately, like, we did try a few other things, but nothing really filled that void that we felt that we needed to keep searching.
And then I'll speed it up a little bit because I got some content I want to get to with your walk a little bit. But this is kind of cool, just the purity and availability thing. We don't know each other at all. We didn't even go to the same churches back then. No connections really. But he was seeking out, there's got to be something. There's got to be something. And started seeking out different models and didn't really find. And lo and behold, he's making a few phone calls and he talks to a guy that says, man, you should talk to this guy, Pastor Greg.
Yep.
And you went onto our website.
Yep.
And pretty quickly you were like, Jamie, you got to see this.
Yeah.
And you just felt like it was, I don't know, man. It was like it's a divine appointment. And then we met,
sure it was.
And our families just hit it off. You just know. I don't know. It's hard to explain. You know what I'm talking about if you've had that happen to you, where it's like, well, I guess we're gonna be friends with this family, and it's been neat to kind of just see you guys change and grow. And I would say we'll close off this section. Now it's been what, a year? How long has it been? Okay.
Yeah, maybe like last summer.
Okay.
Mid to late summer.
Okay.
Yeah.
You guys started really getting more involved, and now you've got a home experience, and you're coming to the events, and you guys have done meditations and prayer. We've been together for prayer and hung out. And what ultimately has God spoken to your heart in that as you've made that transition? I think maybe somebody needs to hear that.
Yeah, I love that you asked that question. I would say that it's not knowing how things are going to go is part of the experience, because I think the church does that all for you. I mean, you've got everything. You know exactly what to expect when you get there. You know when you're going to be leaving. You know how the things are going to flow.
Yeah.
And I would say, you mentioned the word corporate, earlier. There's a organization and a structure to it to the point that it offloads the burden from any of the members, whereas the home experience model is like the opposite of that. And so I think that's probably been the thing that we've had to like lean in on the most is not knowing is okay, some of the disorganization and figuring things out as we go, like that's the beauty of it at the same time. So I think like disconnecting that uber structured like church mindset that we have in America and then getting into this it's a major like I mean, better than anybody, it's rock your world kind of different. So
but it leads you to taking ownership of your walk with Christ. And would you feel like that's been true for you?
Yeah.
Like now you're really just owning it, and it's been pretty cool. So one of the things that we've talked about is the importance of relationship, and how God will literally, bring people into your path for relationship. And you have always had a heart for men. You have a passion to see men kind of live a life of freedom. And one of the things that we've talked about that trips guys up a lot is getting their priorities out of whack. If you think about a bullseye, in the center bullseye, the most important thing should be God. And then if you're married, it should be your wife. And then if you have kids, it should be and then work should be somewhere outside of that.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, men and women, work takes that top spot in the bullseye oftentimes. It's where we spend all our energy, our time, our effort, all that kind of stuff. Talk a little bit about that in terms of your personal experience. Have you experienced that? And what did it do for you? And how have you sort of learned how to deal with that? Because I think that could speak to somebody.
Yeah, I would affirm what you're saying first. Like I've definitely had many seasons in my life, some different than others, but ultimately where I've tried to control outcomes. Yeah. And I think a lot of, like you just said, a lot of people can relate to that. So absolutely. I mean, I have for sure had maybe my priorities out of order. And if it wasn't for hours working, it was like mental space. Like I would find that I wasn't present. I still struggle with that, by the way, for sure. Maybe I'm there, I'm not sitting behind my desk, but I'm not fully
You're not present with your family.
Yeah, and
you've expended all your energy.
Yeah, and I think, like we've talked before, we need to be excellent in what we're doing for the glory of the Lord. So I'm a firm believer in doing our best, but trusting Him with the outcome. And I think that's something that, the results part of it is still a natural tendency for me to gravitate towards, to try to control and do everything that I can to control the results and the outcome. And ultimately He's going to control that, and I need to surrender that to Him. So
yeah, because I think you can get caught up in this idea that if I work a few more hours, I can do a little bit better. So you go from 40 to 45. If I go to 50, I could take on a few more clients, and then once I'm at 50, I go to 52, and then they need me on a Saturday, and where does it end? And I think you shared with me somebody told you something about the 40 hours.
Yeah, I had a mentor of mine. I was struggling with this earlier in my marriage. We had our oldest, and so new dad and time commitments,
Trying to figure it all out.
I'm sure a lot of people can relate. Like your time is suddenly really compressed, and I was struggling, and I just shared with him about it, and he said that God will do more with 40 hours than you ever could with 60, 70, however. And the point was, God will multiply your time. And he just kind of kept repeating that to me over a lot of meetings, and it sunk in, and I try to really, be mindful of that. God will multiply your effort. You got to show up and put in the work, but He will multiply your faithfulness. And
it kind of brings me back to Pastor Matt's message last week about worship. We think about worship, and I think that word's gotten hijacked by the music industry to say that, this is worship. It's singing a song like this with
Right.
hand surrendered and blah, blah, blah. That's great. That's not worship. And Matt sort of set us all on this course of no, worship is, he said, like a reckless abandonment, like a total surrender. And so if you're going to work the 40 hours, work the 40 hours, but you got to surrender the result because God will do more. If you try to control everything, you're actually limiting God, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Amazing.
I love that. That's a great point. Yeah.
So I want to spend a little time maybe in your groups talking a little bit about that, but something even more important is I've heard you talk. You mentioned, well, a mentor of mine. Well, this guy invested in me. That's this word we call discipleship. Give us your personal experience about that, because like even in that moment where you were going down this path of working too much and putting too much of your focus and energy, if you didn't have that, where would you be?
If I didn't have the
If you didn't have the
discipleship.
mentor?
Yeah, I think the short story of kind of what kind of radically shifted my views on that was I was pursuing a mentor for business reasons, and it was actually my dad that just asked me one simple question one night when I was having a conversation with him, and he said, "What if you pursued a godly mentor? And maybe the business part, maybe it came with it, maybe it didn't."
That's great advice.
It hit me pretty hard at the time. I probably,
You wanted success in business, man.
Yeah.
And you wanted the entrepreneurs and the guys, the movers, the shakers. Maybe somebody's got an opportunity, right? We think this
totally.
way.
Yep.
Wow. But for your dad to say,
yeah,
hey, Chris, how about you consider somebody that's going to lead you down the path of worship, surrendering it to God, and then God will figure out the results.
The rest,
Man.
Yep.
So you said you pursued that. Talk about why that's important, because I think everybody in our church understands that part of our major reason why we exist, in fact, at the end of the day, everything filters down to whatever God is giving you. Your goal in life is to share that and give it away. Okay, totally. That's what true discipleship is. It's caring for others. It's walking with other people. Okay, and yet so many people don't do that. Especially my experience has been in the traditional church model. That discipleship gets sort of buried somewhere down here, or it looks like, well, I go to a group once a week with some guys, and that's kind of, and it's so much more than that. You want to talk a little bit about that and what your experience has been and your heart on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's availability, like you said, and I think it's the one-on-one time. I'm huge on the one-on-one time, because dynamics change so much when you add people to the mix. It just does. It does. Especially for guys, but I would say it's...
You can hide a lot easier too, not share.
Yeah, and I think, you know my story about how I got that mentor the first time. I just asked. It was literally that simple, and I think a lot of people shy away from that. They're waiting for someone to come to them. They're waiting for someone to ask them. It's probably not going to happen.
Right.
I hate to say that, but it doesn't always happen that way. That I think, that really like radically opened my eyes. Like, I was seeking something, and the guy that I asked for help on, he said, "Yeah, I'll do it, absolutely," and that started a pretty tight relationship. Yeah,
that's pretty cool. I want to make sure I emphasize that point, because I think so many times people come into a church, environment, or into a community like this, and they're like, okay, bring me a mentor. And it's like, how about we go to the Lord and we seek that out, and then we watch, we listen, we pay attention. There are a lot of people now in our church, so there's more and more people. We come to an event, start to pray about that, and go, I'm gonna go ask this guy, if he can have coffee. And then what has it meant to you? Like what has that meant for you personally in your growth and your really being a follower of Christ and where you are today?
Oh, I think a lot. I mean, I feel that having someone that is that next stage of life ahead of you, spiritually, in family, in terms of like just years on the earth. I mean, let's be honest, that's so valuable. And I think it gets undermined maybe too much in society, where Oh, it's been, I don't know that I could say how valuable it's been. And I had a great relationship with my dad, I do.
Yeah.
And I think he would tell you the same thing, that it's getting someone that's not, your father to really invest in you. And I would even add, it's been cool because the relationship, I think, now that I'm older, that was maybe when all this started, 10 years ago or so, give or take, is the two-way side of the relationship. I've had mentors that have been able to, they have kids my age, and they're asking me for questions and wisdom and feedback, and it's really turned into like it's iron sharpening iron.
Such a good point, Chris. I think the thing we get wrong is we think like, oh, I'm going to get a mentor, or as a mentor, okay, pull out your notebook and I'm going to tell you all the answers. I have found that it's not been like that at all. In fact, I would say that we have a discipleship relationship. Would you agree?
Agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
What that means to me is we have a friendship that is willing to get involved in the things that he may be struggling with or I may be struggling with. I'm going to be vulnerable and share those things, and he's got to be vulnerable to share those things. You got to trust. You got to trust the other person. But I've learned over time that discipleship, the way Jesus did it too, by the way, was at the Last Supper, right? He's washing their feet and he's serving them, and he says, I don't call you servants. I don't call you slaves. I call you friends. He enjoyed the fellowship together. And I think if there's one point that I think you've really exemplified, and what I want you to understand is those friendships can become deep friendships. But you got to pursue them. And I think the number one thing you do is you got to take it to God. And you got to say, all right, Lord, if you're seeking someone in your life that you feel like is a little bit ahead of you, which I think is healthy, you got to pray for that. But then we're also called to then do the same for somebody that maybe isn't as far along as us in our walk. Has that been something that you've prayed about in your own life? And where does God have you right now in feeling in terms of giving back? And
that's a great question, because I think that gives you the varied perspective on things, and you really then, when you're in the other seat, you can really have more respect for the people that came alongside and really discipled you because of the time, because it is a time commitment. You feel initially when you're seeking a mentor that you're the one receiving, like you said, and the other person's giving. And so I think it's critical. I mean, the Bible commands us to go and make disciples. It's not a one-sided part of it. So I think your challenge is spot on, and it's been great to be on both sides of it for sure.
The other thing that I've realized is that you can have discipleship friendships with quite a few people, actually, if you're open and available, and you're willing to share. Chris and I, we don't get together all the time, but we'll call each other. We'll say, "Hey, man, it's time for us to get a coffee," and we'll just catch up and we'll share. I personally have several guys that I walk through life with and meet with on a regular basis and have conversations with them. I also think I'm going to bring up this subject, and maybe we'll put this as a question or not, but I think another thing that we've gotten wrong as a church as a whole, and I'm bringing up a little bit of a controversial subject here, but I feel like I need to say this. Because of the sexualization of our society, let's face it, I mean, our society is gotten so sexualized that we've even gotten away from discipleship relationships between a male and a female. That's almost like controversial now. It's like, oh, you can't never meet with a female. And listen, I understand the guidelines as far as like keeping yourself pure, but what happened to brother and sister relationships? What happened to grandfather? And listen, there are so many people today that don't have a dad. They don't have a grandfather. They don't have a mother. They don't have When Jesus is on the cross and he is breathing his last breath, he looks down and sees his mother, and she's there, and John is there. And in a moment, John's parents had passed away. Mary's son was about to die. he looks at his mom and he says, Mom, take this man here, John, as your son. John, take this woman here as your mother. And it says from that point forward, John took Mary into his home and cared for her. I think it's important that we still remember, if you're living a life of purity, that there's going to be grandmother type figures that can come into your life. There can be younger sibling, niece type relationships. We can't neglect those things. And I pray that you would allow God to show you if there are relationships that what sometimes a woman needs is a fatherly figure. I call it the teddy bear, Some of these guys are big guys, and they're just softies, and the same way with guys. Like sometimes they need a grandmotherly figure, or somebody that's gonna mother them. You may not even have kids, but you have that motherly heart and instinct. Don't limit God. Don't limit him to say, well, you didn't have kids, so therefore you can't. He might bring you somebody that you could be a motherly figure in their life and mentor and guide them in the way of Jesus. And I think personally that is a beautiful reflection of how ultimately the family of God can be built. I see it in our home experiences. I have every week about 15 to 18 people here, and I have young men in here that I love and disciple and talk to, and there's a lot of young women here as well. And it's really neat because I don't have any daughters. I only have boys. But man, God gives you these little glimpses of but it's see, I'm giving you that in a different way. Mm-hmm. Keep it pure, but remember, we belong to the body of Christ, and I think that's just important to say that don't forget that God can bring you these pure relationships, and you can give back to someone else. I think if you're married, you need to have these conversations, with your wife or your husband, and talk about that. But a married couple can also disciple somebody together. Mm-hmm. And there's a young lady that needs discipleship. Meet together. He can bring some fatherly advice, and she can bring some motherly advice. Don't forget that you have a team. If you're married, you've got a team effort to do that.
And same, I would say that's a good point. I think having mentor couples as a couple, critical.
It's a big deal. Ultimately, if you pray about this and you allow God to show you what he has for you, he will literally lead you and guide you. If you're truly open and you're saying, Lord, I'm going to go, I'm available, I will do this, he will bring people into your path. As your pastor, as your shepherd, if you have questions about that, I'm happy to help walk you through that, because we want to keep those relationships healthy and moving towards purity in Christ. But I think there's just so many opportunities for us as a community to continue to shepherd and guide and lead each other in the way of Jesus. Chris, thanks for sharing your heart.
Thanks for having me.
If you see him at one of our next events, come and say hi, meet his wife, meet his kids, great family. And I'm excited. I say this all the time. We've been friends not even a year. I'm excited what it's going to be like after 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. To me, that's exciting. Imagine getting to see your kids get married or being part of that. To me, that's where life gets really exciting. So have a long-term approach to life and to discipleship. Enjoy the time in your groups discussing all these different topics. I hope it's fruitful. And then, hey, apply them to your daily life and let Jesus do something really special in your life. God bless.